Hi everybody. Building a resilience is all about a tolerance level to help with mental health and also for everybody really with our well-being. Is learning to be able to tolerate and be able to cope better with daily pressures, difficult pressures that stress when stress occurs, being able to manage it better and cope with it better, taking back some control to be able to do that. The resilience built around it is all about strengthening the mind, strengthening to be able to do that. Now it takes a bit of practice to do. It takes time to be able to build back on that. If you have poor mental health, it's not to say that it's impossible to do. It just takes a little bit longer. It just takes time to do. It's all about learning to be able to do that, and it takes practice to do that. Being patient being patient as well, having the patience there, which sometimes is difficult because dealing with difficulties, everybody's got their own difficult experiences when suffering with mental health problems. We just want it to go away. We just want those difficulties to go away. But the more we try to push, the more difficult it gets, the more added that's laid on top. And quite often as well it's all about learning to let go of those difficulties, those pressures that arise with emotions, your feelings, difficult emotions there. It's learning to let go of them when they arise, because quite often clinging on, the mind always wants to cling on to those difficulties, and the more you cling on to those difficulties, the harder sometimes it gets to be able to let go of them. And once you're in the throes of those difficulties, clinging on, it just, like I said, it just gets harder, and sometimes the added laid on top, which adds more of a problem. So it's learning as well to let go when those difficulties, those difficult situations that is built around stress, anxiety that affects mental health, is learning to let go when they arise, is learning to let go of those difficulties, learning to tolerate those difficulties and being able to cope with them better. Because once you start to cope with them better, it gets easier as time goes on. So building on a resilience and taking back control there will help, because strengthen the mind, strengthen your mind to be able to cope with those difficulties, those difficult situations. Not everybody has their own difficult experiences with mental health, like suffering with mental health problems. So things do take time. It takes time to build that resilience there and learn to tolerate with those difficulties, the stress. Because like I said, being in the throes of it, it's like stuck in the middle of it and the negative built around it. So it's learning, it's just practicing and learning to have coping mechanism, being able to cope with it, having some things to learn to be able to cope with it, like self-help coping strategies, like to be able to cope with it. And once you learn to be able to cope with it, you're strengthening your mind. The mind has to heal. It takes time. The mind clings. It clings, it craves. It's normal. That's what the mind does. The human mind, that's what it does. And sometimes it clings on to those difficult experiences that causes stress and anxiety and the negative feeling of and the difficulties around emotions. Learning to, strengthening, like I said, strengthening the mind, building on resilience to build a tolerance level. So once you get to that stage, which everybody's different in how they heal and what they do to help, what works for them might not work for somebody else. So everybody has their own routine as well to be able to cope with it. The good habits, I call it the good habits there. So strengthening it, once you start to build on that tolerance level, that's where that's the resilience, and that's where things that you may come across, even with your difficulties with your emotions, that the difficult experiences that occur, the difficult situations that arise from day-to-day living that affect us sometimes, that affect our mental health and our well-being. Like I said, if you're suffering with poor mental health conditions, it can, it doesn't mean to say that you can't build back a tolerance level to be able to cope with it. It is possible to do. It just takes time. And what you do, the more you learn and practice in what you do, the persistency around it, you start to feel that benefit. And once you start to feel that benefit, you're building a tolerance level as you go along. As you go along through your healing process, you're starting to build on that tolerance level to be able to tolerate the stress, the difficulties with your mental health. You tolerate it, the resilience. You start to build that resilience there, and that's what it's all about. Once you've got that tolerance level, you're able to cope and maintain your mental health and your well-being better, coping with the situation. There's many things to help build back that and take back that control with it. It's learning to, first of all, understanding the difficulties, the difficult experiences that you may experience, is learning to understand that, process it better, being able to process your emotions better, learning self-help coping, to having self-help coping tools there. All that in itself, as you go through your healing process, your recovery, as you go along, like I said, you're building strength, you're building the mind strengthening again, and once you start to feel those benefits and what you're doing, is the tolerance level. You start to build a resilience around it to be able to maintain and manage those difficulties. Like I said, it takes time. Practicing mindfulness is a good thing to do because it helps you to, learns you to cope better with those difficult experiences. It helps you with that stress, the stress built around it, the anxiety. Practicing mindfulness will help you to develop and be able to maintain all that in a more calmer way. And once you feel more calmer within yourself, you build on being positive a bit more. You head towards the positive a bit more and pull away from the negative that's built around it. Okay, we can't all be positive all the time. We can't always be positive. It's just something that just doesn't happen. Sometimes everybody can feel negative. It depends on what's going on at that particular time, what's happened, what the difficult experience is. Suffering with mental health problems, it wouldn't be so much of a problem if we were always positive. That's what the mind does when it's confused, when it's healing. The illness. The illness in itself, whatever condition you may have, is built around negative and difficulty with emotions and difficulty with thoughts and how you perceive those thoughts. It's an illness, and that's how that's how it affects people. Everybody gets affected in different ways. How the illness affects them could be, someone could have like schizophrenia. It doesn't mean to say that everybody that suffers with schizophrenia, it affects them all the same. Everybody, people get affected, with the symptoms, it affects them differently, how the illness affects an individual. And it's the same with bipolar, whatever depression, whatever illness it is, everybody has their own experiences with it, difficulties with it. So learning to build back and take back a bit of control and build back on that tolerance level, having a tolerance level there, the resilience, building on a resilience, to be more resilient around your mental health. And also as well, we can all do it to help with our well-being, being more resilient, to be able to cope, because we could all we could all get affected by stress sometimes, difficulties with stress, bit of anxiety. Okay, it may not be as bad as someone who has an illness that is really badly affected by it, but if it's not dealt with properly and it carries on, things can progress into something that can affect our mental health. So we can all learn by being more resilient and having that building on a tolerance level to be able to cope with difficult experiences. Like I said, mindfulness is a good one. It will help you to, like I said, help with your difficult emotions and feelings, being able to process them better, help you to feel more calmer within yourself, so that will reduce the stress, the anxiety. You can practice being mindful on your day-to-day living, the things you do. Being the awareness around it, like being the awareness towards yourself in a better way. Practice being, like I said, being mindful, noticing things, like being mindful when you're cooking, being mindful out on your walk, noticing things like sounds, sights, touch, the feel of things quite often, and smell, like taste. Quite often we can forget about all that and we're thinking about the next thing that we're going to be doing. We're always one step ahead instead of stepping back and staying in the present moment and enjoying that moment that we're in, rather than thinking ahead of the next thing we're going to be doing. The mind is racing you over, it goes on overload, and sometimes it becomes a bit of a problem there. So being mindful and taking that step back and enjoying the present moment and being mindful is a good thing to have as well. There are many things that you can do to build on that resilience there, and to learn to tolerate the day-to-day stresses as well, with your self-help coping tools and head towards a more positive outlook within yourself and build back that confidence within yourself. So I'm going to end the video there. Please share and don't forget to give us a like, and see you in the next video.